After the events of Egghead finally coming to a close with the recent chapters confirming Kizaru did not want to kill Vegapunk, it got me thinking what would have happened if Kizaru was, let's say, sent to Wano and wasn't mentally held back. A lot of people within the community believe Kizaru didn't want to kill Vegapunk and therefore he was stronger than Luffy had he not had that mental nerf, and they even go as far as to say he exceeds the Yonko and could have handled Big Mom and Kaido alone. So let's break down Kizaru's scaling in Egghead and see where a hypothetical peak Kizaru would stack up against in the final act of Wano. Now, Kizaru, even before landing on Egghead, was talking about going to Wano himself after hearing about Kaido and Big Mom's new alliance, with the only reason he didn't want to go was because of Akainu. He was worried of dealing with an army he has no real info on, so he didn't want to go in blind, therefore he didn't send Kizaru. A lot of people like to use this to say that the admirals are above the Yonko, but for one, he'd have no real clue on how strong either one of them are currently. And two, if we take this Kizaru statement at face value, then we also have to take Akainu's statement right after the Wano samurai at face value. Because why would Akainu be tripping and tweaking out over random samurai? Why is that so much of a worry for Akainu? I feel like this scene is used to rather emphasize the strength of the Yonko rather than the opposite, since they were discussing them being stronger than ever, and Akainu himself doesn't want to risk any of his men going in blind. Which is kind of the reason why Green Bull was sent right after Kaido was gone. Kizaru saying this shouldn't be taken seriously at all. So now that that's addressed, we can actually get into his scaling and not worry about statements that are just agenda bait. Now, Kizaru, even when just arriving onto Egghead, caught the attention of Luffy, and he even notes how his presence felt so strong. The two then engage in a battle with Luffy using Snakeman, only for Kizaru to dismiss him relatively easily. Kizaru acknowledges how he can see how Luffy brought down Kaido, which a lot of people like to use this statement specifically and say fucking Current Snakeman without acoc is stronger than Gear 5 and Kaido, which is kinda dumb all things considered because we see Gear 4 Luffy not even being able to hurt the pacifistas who get compared to King and Kaido when it comes to their durability. Now, did Luffy get stronger between Wano and Egghead? Probably, just because the Straw Hats naturally grow more powerful after each island they pass, but I don't think you can prove that it's that significant of a degree, and also Luffy himself in this arc isn't even at his peak anyway. I say this because we know Gear 5 not only takes a ridiculous amount of stamina, but even Luffy was utilizing Gear 4, meaning he is burning through some type of Haki even if it's to a small degree. He also gets hit through Vegapunk's barrier, which nearly killed him in the first place. And yet, despite all of this, Luffy with just one advanced conqueror's kick did this to Kizaru. Now, we do see that Kizaru himself is definitely hesitant on killing Vegapunk, which could give Luffy easier opportunities to deal with him. And it also explains why weaker characters like Frankie and Sanji aren't getting completely folded. But I don't think Kizaru is holding back on Luffy specifically or not trying to kill him. Even if we give Kizaru this mental nerf, we know Luffy is being held back by things we've seen be very draining for him physically, so I'd argue Luffy is further away from his peak than Kizaru should be. And even with this in mind, Kizaru tried jumping him with Saturn and they both got mocked on. Now, I will say, Kizaru being able to pierce Gear 5 skin and actually perform like this against base Gear 5 is still impressive, especially when considering Kaido initially was not really having the best of time against him. But I don't think it's as impressive as a lot of people like to say it is. I'd say he loses to Gear 5 Luffy like 6 out of 10 times. We'll say so that they can fight Luffy doesn't go Gear 5 yet and is still presumed to be dead. And as Kaido believes he's won, like when Luffy sends Kizaru on Egghead, Kaido would sense a strong presence approaching him. It'd be none other than Kizaru who'd come down to avenge Cipher Pol and take down the strongest creature, Kaido. Now, before I answer who wins, we need to talk about Kaido's scaling. Kaido, by this point, going into the fight, has already shown better feats than suppressed Kizaru. Not only was he able to deal with Snakeman Luffy plus Yamato, but even before this was fighting 4 other individuals, and the Luffy he's fighting is using advanced conquerors. And yet, despite this, after locking in, he'd managed to not only kill Luffy, but we'd see him blitz and do insane damage to Gear 5 Luffy later on in their fight. And even though he lost to Luffy, Kaido still forced him to use all of his types of Haki, and it was still just barely enough to put down a weakened Kaido down. I think a lot of people talk about him losing to Gear 5, but don't actually see that Kaido was taking crazy damage from over 10 plus other characters before this, and in between all of these rounds was drinking alcohol and just making fun of Luffy. It goes without saying he has one of, if not the best endurance within the series, and it's going to be ridiculously hard for Barcelona to put him down. So with both characters out the way, who wins? Well, an easy way to answer this is just by looking at Gear 5 for a comparison, as both characters have fought Luffy. However, with the context, it's just really not a good comparison. You see, Kizaru, while being held back by something that's unquantifiable, lost to a weakened Luffy, while Luffy just barely managed to be a weakened Kaido at full power. I do think with Kizaru's speed and his fruit, initially he would probably annoy Kaido, but once he locks in and says his Haki speech or sobers up, he's just going to legit blitz him with a Thunder Bagua and knock him out of consciousness. If you guys want more evidence for this, we could say Kaido and Shanks can at least fight each other while Kizaru got folded by him in like 6 seconds. And even weaker characters were threatening him like Ben Beckman, but Film Red is/isn't canon. I don't know, I'm confused about it, and it could be looked at as unreliable. I don't think the feats that are established in this movie necessarily contradict the story, but again, it's just extra stuff that I wanted to show you to suggest that Kizaru was probably lying about being able to handle things in Wano. Unfortunately for my stoned goat, the alcoholic deadbeat fish is folding him with medium difficulty. And let's say if Kizaru didn't make it up and instead had to go through, let's say, Big Mom, Kid, or Law, I'm not gonna lie, I don't even think Kizaru makes it up to the rooftop. Big Mom, with her abilities and her relativity to Kaido, could at least mean to me she'd perform at least better than Snakeman Luffy and potentially just as well as Base Gear 5. Granted, Kizaru's speed is superior to Linlin's by a lot, but it's going to be hard for him to really do anything in general, especially with characters like Kid and Law in the background. Like, if Kid lands a damn punk or Law uses his newly awakened Devil Fruit, there's really nothing Kizaru could do. And I think we can dismiss this panel and finally say Akainu definitely saved Bro from an early retirement.